Good day, everyone. Welcome to our group discussion for the website translation project titled From the Portal to Paper Translating for Real World Impact. Our group chose a Malay language article that discussed Budget 2026 and the government's strategy to strengthen the Malay language as the national language while emphasizing English proficiency for global competitiveness. Our goal was not just to translate the words, but also to convey cultural meaning, policy context, and formal tone for an international English speaking audience. Each of us was assigned a role: language analysis, contextual researcher, translation strategist, and presentation lead. Two members collaborated in some roles to ensure throughoutness. During this discussion, each member will present insight about challenges faced, strategies used, and key decisions made during the translation. So we will also showcase examples of restructuring, vocabulary choices, and cultural adaptation that improve the clarity and professional tone of the translated text.
As a language analyst, my responsibility was to check grammar, sentence structure, and overall clarity in English. One challenge we encountered was long Malay sentences with multiple clauses. For instance, the original text often combined policy objectives and implementation challenges into a single sentence. In English, this would appear heavy and confusing. To address this, I split long sentences into two or sometimes three shorter sentences. This retained the meaning while improving readability. Another challenge was passive structures. Common in Malay, English readers generally prefer active construction for clarity, so I sometimes converted passive sentences into active forms. For example, the sentence was about the Prime Minister. Emphasizing the importance of Malay was rephrased actively to clearly show the subject performing the action. Finally, I ensured punctuation and conjunction were correct so the ideas flowed logically from one sentence to the next. This step was essential to avoid confusion, especially since multiple translators contributed to this different session.
My focus complemented R's work. I concentrated on cohesion, consistency, and readability across all sections. Because six members worked on translating different sections, there was a risk that sentences would feel disconnected. I checked transitions between paragraphs and ensured that ideas flow naturally. Another issue involved literal translation. Some Malay phrases, when translated word for word, sounded unnatural in English. For example, langkah strategic was translated as strategic measures rather than strategic steps, preserving both meaning and formal tone. By discussing these choices with the group, we agreed on conventions that were applied throughout the translation, maintaining a professional yet coherent style.
As a contextual researcher, sorry, my role was to ensure the cultural and factual integrity of the translation. The article contains references to the national language, education reforms, and international schools, all of which have significant cultural implications in Malaysia. For example, the term Bahasa Ilmu literally means language of knowledge. Translating it as academic knowledge would miss the ideological emphasis on intellectual development through the national language. We translated it as a language of knowledge to preserve this meaning. Similarly, Sekolah Antarabangsa was carefully translated as international schools, ensuring international readers understand the context without assuming familiarity with the Malaysian education system.
I focus on policy and factual references. Budget 2026 includes initiatives like reviving the National Language Award and mandating Malay language instruction in all schools. I verified these terms and phrases to ensure accurate translation. For instance, Hadiah Bahasa was translated as National Language Award, giving clarity to international readers. So another challenge another challenge was preserving nuance. When the Malay text discusses balancing Malay and English, it implies cultural and global identity simultaneously. I made sure our English version reflected the subtlety by carefully choosing words like complementary and bridge to the global community.
My role was to ensure that the tone, style, and terminology remain consistent throughout the translation. The article uses a formal, policy oriented, and reflective tone. Therefore, we avoided casual phrasing, contraction, and colloquial expressions. We also standardized key terms to avoid confusion. For instance, empowerment, national identity, and global competitiveness. We we were carefully applied consistently across paragraph. A particular challenge was deciding between literal translation and communicative translation. Some sentences carried rhetorical elements in Malay, which, if translated literally, would sound unnatural in English. I guided the team to focus on meaning and audience comprehension while staying faithful to the original tone. For example, the sentence discussing the role of Malay as both a symbol of identity and functional language was slightly restructured in English to preserve rhythm and emphasis without losing meaning.
Let me illustrate with concrete example. One paragraph in Malay read, Bahasa Melayu bukan sekadar alat komunikasi, tetapi lambang identiti nasional dan warisan budaya yang menyatukan rakyat pelbagai kaum. A literal translation would have been Malay language is not only a communication tool, but a symbol of national identity and cultural heritage that unites people of various races. We revised it to the Malay language is not merely a tool for communication. Our collective evaluation of the translation process, the decision we made, and the lesson we gained from this project. After multiple rounds of translation, peer review, and discussion, we anonymously agreed that our final English version fulfills the communicative purpose of the source text, while remaining faithful to its ideological, cultural, and policy-driven intent. Rather than aiming for literal equivalence, our group consciously prioritized functional and communicative equivalence, ensuring that international readers can clearly understand Malaysia's language policy without cultural or linguistic barriers. This consensus reflects our shared understanding that translation, especially in real world contexts, such as government discourse, is not neutral or mechanical. It requires judgment, nego, ne, negos, ne, negotiation, and responsibility. Our final output is therefore not just a translated text, but a mediated and adapted representation of the original Malay article.
From a linguistic standpoint, our group reached a strong consensus that clarity must always take precedence over structural imitation. While the Malay source that often use long layered sentences to convey authority and formality, directly mirroring the structure in English would compromise readability. As a group, we agreed that splitting sentences and reorganizing information was not an act of simplification, but a necessary process of linguistic adjustment. This ensured that key ideas such as policy objectives, implementation strategies, and national aspirations remain clear and accessible. We also concluded that grammatical accuracy alone does not guarantee effective communication. Cohesion, logical progression, and synthetic balance are equally important through collaborative uh, sorry equally important. Through collaborative editing, we ensured that each paragraph flowed naturally and contributed meaningfully to the overall argument of the article.
Buildings of textual unity and consistency. Since multiple members translated different sections, there was a genuine risk that the final product would feel fragmented. Well, as a group, we therefore agreed on standardizing sentence patterns, paragraph structure, and formal register. This allowed the final translation to read as a single, cohesive document rather than a complication of individual efforts. Another point of consensus was our decision to avoid overly literal phrasing. We agreed that unnatural expressions, even if accurate in meaning, weaken the professionalism of the text. Therefore, readability and stylistic fluency were treated as indicators of translation quality, not secondary concerns.
From the cultural perspective, our group consensus was that contextual awareness significantly enhanced translation accuracy. The article is deeply embedded in Malaysia's socio-linguistic landscape, particularly in its treatment of the Malay language as both a symbol of national identity and a practical tool of education. We collectively agreed that culturally significant terms could not be translated without interpretation. Concepts such as bahasa ilmu and bahasa kebangsaan carry ideological weight that extends beyond their literal meanings. Preserving this weight required careful phrasing rather than direct substitution. And so our consensus also recognized that international readers may lack background knowledge about Malaysia. Therefore, strategic clarification without over explaining was essential to ensure accessibility while maintaining formality.
From a policy and factual standpoint, our group agreed that accuracy is a non-negotiable responsibility in translation. Government initiative, awards, and institutional references need to be translated precisely. to avoid any distortion or misinterpretation. So, as a group, we agree that verifying these references strengthen the credibility of the translation and align it with the professional translation ethics. Translators are not merely language users, but they act as a cultural and informational gatekeepers. So, we also reach a consensus that the article's discussion on balancing Malay and English required particle sensitivity rather than framing the two language as a competing forces. We deliberately adopted phrasing that presented them as a complementary roles, reflecting the original text, intent, and national narrative.
Strategically, our group consensus was that this project reinforced the value of audience-oriented translation. The intended audience for the English version is not for local Malay readers, but international stakeholders, academics, and policymakers. We therefore agreed that communicative translation was more appropriate than literal translation. Rhetorical devices in Malay were adapted to suit English discourse norms while preserving emphasis and tone. Our consensus also highlighted that tone consistency is crucial in policy-related texts. Formality, neutrality, and authority had to be maintained throughout, which required collective agreement on terminology and stylistic conventions. This strategic alignment ensured that the translated text reflected institutional credibility.
At the group level, our final consensus is that collaboration was the most critical factors in producing a high quality translation. Each rule was interdependent linguistic refinement relied on contextual understanding, while strategic decision depended on grammatical and cultural accuracy. We collectively agreed that peer review was not merely corrective but educational. It encouraged justification of translation choices, exposure to alternative interpretation, and sorry, and deeper awareness of translation as a discipline. Through discussion and negotiation, we learned that this disagreement is not weakness but a strength. In collaborative translation, it leads to more thoughtful, defensible, and informed decision. As a final consensus, our group agrees that this project has demonstrated that the following key insights. Translation is interpretive strategy and collaborative process. Linguistic accuracy must be balanced with readability and audience expectation. Cultural and contextual sensitivity is essential for real-world impact. Peer collaboration enhance both translation quality and critical thinking. Professional translation requires ethical responsibility, not just language proficiency. We believe our final translation successfully communicates Malaysia's language policy discourse in a way that is accurate, cultural, respectful, and accessible to an international audience. In closing, this project has significantly deepened our understanding of translation beyond the classroom. It has shown us that translation operates at the intersection of language, cultural, policy, and identity. The experience has prepared us to approach future translation tasks with greater awareness, confidence, and professionalism of teamwork, dialogue, and reflection in producing meaningful and impactful translation. Thank you all for your time and attention.